Welcome to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. Today is all about why we need to stop shying away from naming our price as service professionals and being empowered to tell potential clients what that price is. I am bringing on to this episode Chicago wedding photographer Ben Ramos. Ben is the owner and lead photographer of Ben Ramos Photography. He has worked with couples, and it is his passion to do so. With each wedding he photographs, he falls deeper in love with his craft. He is most in his element when he's behind the camera directing couples while creating the perfect atmosphere for them to do what they do best, which is just be themselves. Ben is also a coach in the wedding industry and entrepreneurial world, and he has a lot to say about his business trajectory with pricing and being able to price appropriately for your business and for your clients and for your region. And I even go back into the vault of when I was running Paige Marie Photography, and Ben and I kind of go back and forth in this episode on what pricing looked like back in the day versus when we were 2 to 3 years into the business to what we charge now, and how to charge what you're worth when you're fully equipped with all of the gear and all of the experience, and you have all kinds of team members on board as well. So you guys, this episode is for everyone. And I cannot wait to not talk about something legal and just talk about business strategies, particularly in the pricing realm. So let's get into this episode, Legal Pagers. You're listening to the Legal Paige podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. You guys, I am so excited to have Ben Ramos here to talk all about pricing and why all of us in the wedding industry primarily need to stop being afraid to name our prices and really own it. Now, I know Ben quite well. We actually met about 1.5 years ago in person, but we've been virtual friends for a while. Ben, I would love you to introduce yourself to the TLP community.
Hey, TLP. What's up, Paige? Thank you so much for bringing me on. I'm so honored, so hyped. So for you guys that are new to me and learning about me, my name is Ben Ramos. I am a wedding photographer based in Chicago, Illinois. I started my business actually while I was attending the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. I was originally pursuing to be a nurse, and then I picked up a camera like sophomore year, started a business junior year, and it just blew up going into my senior year. So I ended up dropping out, and I moved back to my home state. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs. So it was always a dream of mine to come back to the city. So I moved to Chicago at the end of 2016, and I've planted my roots here, and have just grown my wedding photography business here in Chicago. And so to date, now I have a team of myself plus 5 others. We have 4 photographers and a COO as well. And then on top of that, we have photographed, I believe, and worked with 300 plus couples around the world. And so most of our business is here in Chicago. We do dabble and travel a little bit around the US and some international. And and then on top of that, my fiance Emily and I, we co-own another company called Bread and Honey, which is our coaching and mentoring business, where we help other creative entrepreneurs on how to run their businesses. So from anything from website critiques and pricing structure to budgeting and how to run a personal budget and a business budget, we kind of dive into all of the nitty-gritty stuff to help you run a kick-ass business.
And that's exactly why I wanted to have you on the show today, because you guys, I was brainstorming and trying to think of who do I know in the industry that just does pricing and talks about it in such a straightforward way, but also really hones in on kind of like what the business is. And I just remember Ben being so open and forthright when I first met him about just the way he does business and the way he structures his pricing. And so Ben was the first person that came to mind. So Ben, I'm super excited that you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so hold on. I have a question. Going back to you've been doing this now for about 5 years, since 2016?
Officially like 2015. So I'm in right now. I think as far as a wedding photographer goes, I'm in like year 7 right now, technically.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome, because I think a lot of people think it's going to take 10 plus years to get to a place that you want to get to. And I would say if we're living in an idyllic world here of photographers, I think they're always some people do just want to like stay solo and, only take on a certain amount of clients per year. But
Right.
You're in a position where a lot of people strive to be, where within a few years, you're building kind of a team, you have associates, you have a whole brand underneath you, and you're serving multiple clients on a weekend. So I think that's really awesome. I'm sure you and I could talk about associates and team members and building your business. I mean, we both have decently small business, large teams. So yeah, but let's go back to where we both started, where I was like, okay, was it 2015, 2016? I started photography back in 2013. So mine was a little bit before yours, but I think we were, kind of the same era of starting a photography business. And I always like, as we're experts or whatever, if you want to call us that, talking about these topics, we could talk on a high level to people about where you're at right now and what you need to consider and how we can like own our pricing. But I think we need to humble down to where we were when we first started and what our pricing looks like, because that will help people be like, okay, everybody starts somewhere. So when you were first starting, what were you like charging for like a session and a wedding? And then I can chime into on where I was at.
Yeah, for sure. So I had only one package, one size fits all. Okay. It was 10 hours, 2 photographers, free engagement. They got a photo book and they got a photo booth that I man-made. And I charged like $1,500 for that. And now today, that same exact package would probably run around like 14,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And when I first started out, well, I was like, I would like to call myself like a jack of all trades photographer, one of those where I'm, in Montana, like you kind of have to serve clients where they're at. I wasn't really in the wedding world yet. And so I was just trying to get a bunch of photography clients. And it was like that crazy, like $45 per session or something nuts like that. And you're just trying to like build clientele and word of mouth. I think my first wedding, Ben, was like $800.
Ooh. Yeah, I don't know. I hear a lot of people like, they're like, yeah, I shot my first wedding for like $300 or $500. I don't know how I snuck in there and got to $1,500, but I do know it's pretty standard for most people to charge less than $1,000 for their first wedding, like for sure. And when I'm thinking about like my engagement sessions or just portrait sessions, like, yeah, I was in the $50 to $75 range for a session. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, we do have to start somewhere. But at that time, you're thinking like, before I started doing photos for people, it was like art to me. You know what I mean? Like I was coming at it from an artist mindset. I'm like, okay, what are people going to pay me for my art? And I, at the time, didn't think like, oh, you know what? Like I'm actually providing a service. I need to charge it as a service and not as a piece of art, if that makes sense. And so that was like probably my first obstacle that I had to get over back then. And I'm sure that a lot of people in the beginning, like, oh, I just do this for fun, or like, I just do this as like an artistic outlet kind of thing. And then they're like, okay, how do I price that? But you have, at the end of the day, you have to think about the fact that you are providing a service with your art. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I was at too, is if you're breaking it down, if you're first starting out and you're listening in, you guys, don't just look at the number and be like, oh, that's a lot of money for someone to pay. I'm so new. I'm in the industry. My biggest suggestion would be kind of very similar to what Ben is saying, like, what is the art, but also what is the service? And I like to think about it as, what do you want to be paid hourly? Like if you were to go work for someone and you're starting out and you're kind of building your reputation in that position, whether that's any position as a service provider, you probably want to at least be making minimum wage, if not a little bit more than that, because you are technically a quote unquote professional photographer. And so I always like to tell people, if they're always asking me like, I mean, I don't coach like you do, but I have done some in the past when I would say 2 to 3 years ago, I was heavily into mentoring photographers and coaching before, the Lego page
Nice.
just did its own thing. But when I was telling people, I would be like, okay, break it down for how many hours do you think all of that takes? What do you want to be paid hourly? And like start there and then go up from there. Because I think, for me, if I was charging like $50 a session or $95 a session just to get people in the door, I was essentially making like $4 an hour if you broke it down, which is just ridiculous. I could work at a fast food restaurant for more money. So I don't know if you have any other tips for people, like our mindset when we first start out. Can you extrapolate that down a little bit for everyone? Like, what are the core things they need to be thinking about as a new business owner? And then we can kind of get into experienced business owners, like upping that price, naming your price, owning that price.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, as you are trying to build your reputation as a photographer that's providing services, whether that's family photos, senior pictures, engagement photos, proposal, wedding, whatever that is, you do have to like take a step back and realize, you know what, you're not the expert yet. You haven't done this before. And so it's okay to, if you're getting paid at all in the beginning, in my mind, I'm like, yo, that's a win. Like, 3 weeks ago, you had never been paid for photos and all of a sudden someone's paying you, maybe $50 an hour to take some pictures. Like that's incredible. So like definitely don't get out of the mindset of comparing to like what other people around you are doing. I think that's the first thing. And, take little wins as they come. Don't feel like, so-and-so's making like, $300 a session. I only made 75. Well, a few weeks ago, you weren't making anything as a photographer. So now you have to, it's baby steps, and it's a muscle that you have to build, and you have to get comfortable with like understanding, okay, cool. Like $75, this is what I provide. This is how many outfits we can do for that $75, how much time you have with me, how much time it takes to edit, that kind of thing. And, and realize that, okay, you know what, that's not enough. Maybe I should bump up to 100, or, maybe I should bump up to 125 or whatever that is. And I think really what it comes down to is supply and demand. If you have so many people hitting you up that you are going to drive yourself into the ground, then you need to raise your prices. I think that's a great rule of thumb, no matter what level you're at, whether you're just getting started or you are, year 3, year 5, year 7, if you are spreading yourself too thin, you need to raise your prices. That means that you are undercharging what you should be charging because the demand is there, but the supply is not.
Totally. And just to tail on to that as well, the one thing that I think really comes to mind here that you pressed upon was just giving yourself space and grace during that like first few months, I would say, and even year of being a photographer. Yes. You are going to play the comparison game. You are going to be on social media. You are going to research people within your area and what they charge. Like that is just kind of, I would say that's just normal. Like that's normal for any person starting out in any industry, but allow yourself to understand you're just trying to get into the market. You are probably going to have lower prices and that's fine. And then looking at when the demand goes up and allowing yourself the ability to increase prices either gradually or quickly. And it's going to be different for every type of photographer in the industry. So what was your biggest worry, Ben, on that first price increase? I'd love to go there because I think some people are there right now, right? It's like, okay, I started here. I've got a lot of clients. I need to bump it up. Like, what if you even are saying like 1,000, 1,500 more for a wedding or something along those lines? Like, that's a lot. That kind of gives you like a pain in your stomach. What would you tell those people?
Well, I think that it's scary no matter what. Like even to this day, like whenever I raise my prices, I'm like, ooh, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure if this feels right. But at the end of the day, like, if you are pricing, especially in the wedding photography space, like, you're getting booked 12, 18 months out from when you actually do the job. Okay. So between that 12 to 18 months, you're going to have maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 more opportunities to become better at your craft. Therefore, you need to charge more. You need to make up for the amount of experience you're going to gain, and the amount of professionalism, the amount of technical skills you're going to learn. And so you can't, like, when you're thinking about, okay, today maybe I don't feel like I am maybe worth this dollar amount, but you have to think about yourself in a future tense because you are booking for yourself, anywhere from a year to 2 years out. So one thing that I think that the way that I try to measure, how to price yourself, it's really comes down to three things. It comes down to your experience level, it comes down to your market, and it comes down to what you've already been paid in the past and kind of developing some sort of average hourly rate that, you've already been paid this amount. So you should be at the minimum charging at least this hourly amount if you've already on average been paid this amount, if that makes sense. So let's say, for example, when you're just getting started, you are charging, some sessions you get roughly $100 an hour. Some you get like $300 an hour. And on average, you're getting like $175 an hour. Well, when you're building your packages, you should be making sure with that in mind, okay, I want to make sure that I'm getting at least an average of $175 per hour, that kind of thing. And so mathematics comes into it a little bit too, and making sure that it's structured, that you're not, like you can't just say, for example, on an 8-hour package, you can't just be like, okay, my price is $2,000 for 8 hours of coverage. But then your hourly rate is, let's do the math on that really quick while I have a calculator out here. Okay, so $2,000 divided by 8, that's $250 an hour. So then when you have your hourly rate on your a la carte package, you can't say, oh, it's $150 an hour, because then you're selling yourself short, because already when they book you for an 8-hour package, you're getting $250 an hour. So then why would you have an hourly rate at $150 an hour? So things just have to make sense. They have to be consistent and cohesive across all of your, a la carte menu items that you're offering and stuff. But I think the biggest thing to get over that hump is just realizing that, you are better than you were a few days ago or a few months ago, a few years ago, and you still have room to grow. And with experience, with the time that you put into your craft, it needs to be reflected in your pricing. And you deserve to have that margin to grow. But yeah, I think I kind of went on a tangent there, but I think that you just need to realize that, it's a slow burn. It's not something that is going to necessarily happen overnight. If you're a lucky, like one person that gets featured on a crazy blog and you have a crap ton of inquiries come in because you got featured on Junebug weddings or green wedding shoes or something, great. That happens to 1 in a million. But when you're talking about real ass people just doing the real ass work, it's going to take time, and you need to just accept that. And it's going to be something that you just kind of, move up in increments. And just accept that. And everybody's at a different pace. Even the people around you are probably not growing at the same rate that you're growing. And that is okay. Trying to just stay in your own lane and not comparing to one another is going to be crucial.
Yeah, I love the part where you talked about regions and where you're at and your specific locale, because, for example, I am in Montana and you are in Chicago. Those are one, very different standards of living. And two, when you say like $14,000, I get the heebie-jeebies because no one in their right mind charges $14,000 in Montana for photography unless you're shooting at like Rock Creek or Big Sky and you're shooting a huge celebrity wedding. Right. That's where our mind goes to it. But you're like, no, this is like marketplace, like average here where I'm at. So that's a big thing for people is you're going to become friends very quickly, and you're going to start following people in other areas, especially in the photography world, because it's so virtual and so online. And you're going to have these people that give you massive inspiration, and they're your role model photographers that you look up to and want to build a business similar to theirs. That's common. But don't think that then you have to charge similar to what they're charging, or even have a pricing structure similar to what they're charging, because your niche and target market is going to be very different. And that's something I needed to learn. I had a really hard time when I was kind of going from baby photographer, newer photographer, trying to get clients under my belt and experience, building on my equipment. You guys, that's a huge thing you have to consider as well, is like the quality of equipment that you have. And as you increase your camera bodies and your lenses, and obviously with experience as well, using all of that equipment comes a higher price, in my opinion. Ben, I'd love to hear yours on that. But for me, I was like, I could really only have a low package of $3,500 to $4,000. And as I'm getting into, my $5,000, $6,000, that's still a pretty high price for the market I was trying to serve. So I was one of the most expensive photographers in Western Montana, serving kind of, I would say, upper middle class, but not super high profile, high end weddings. And that's just where I was as a photographer. And that's who I wanted to serve. And that's the business I wanted to create. And it's just different. And I think people need to, again, goes back to the comparison game, like stop comparing yourself to others and really figure out what you want, what clients you want to serve. And then you have to figure out what they're willing to pay.
Exactly. And I do think, and even within my market, there are so many different tiers to this market. You know, there are people that, you know, if you live in the city, you're probably, even if you're just a newer photographer, you can start out probably around the $3,000 mark, which is a lot of money. That's a lot of money. For somebody that's never done it, like, holy cow, that's a lot of money. But, you know, if you go maybe 20 minutes outside the city, the average photographer is probably getting like 2,500 or maybe 2,000. And then, you know, as you work your way up to like, I'd say the average for like a standard photographer in Chicago is probably getting somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 would be my guess. And anything above 7,000, I mean, that would be in my eyes considered, I mean, really anything over 5,000 in general should be considered luxury in my mind. But you do have some of the venues where, you know, sometimes in downtown Chicago, like to rent one of the rooms, it's like 65 grand just to rent the room. So like, if you think about like the overall budget and like on average, a photographer is usually getting about 10% of an overall budget. If somebody's spending 65,000 just on their room that they're getting married in or like their reception, they're probably spending, I don't know, $150,000, $200,000 on the wedding, which means 10% of that, that's 15 to 20 grand on some of those super duper high, ultra luxury weddings. But like, you know, that's a very small piece. And then you have people, I think the grand range, you know, there's just so many different tiers, and you have to remember where you're at, where you started, how long you've been doing this, how many reps do you have under your belt before you even start considering to charge those kinds of numbers. You don't want to come out, you know, if you're overpriced, the market's going to tell you that. They're going to be like, you know what, like you're not going to book. And that's the name of the game. Like you have to be priced appropriately for the experience that you offer, and the experience that you have doing this job that you claim to be an expert in.
Yeah, the 10% is really helpful for people too, who are just starting out or in their first year or two, because you kind of just like come up with a number, I feel like. It's just some random amount that you start with.
It's not always easy to like get that kind of information from the client to be like, hey, what are you spending on your wedding? Like that's not something you normally would do. But, you know, if you're working with a planner, you know, maybe, you know, sometimes they'll kind of come out and say, hey, you know, like their budget for wedding photo video is like between this range or something like that. But I feel like, you know, if you are really just getting started, you really should not be, I mean, it's hard to say. I guess it's really hard to say. And considering how many people in so many different areas of the country are going to be listening to this, but I really don't think like, you know, if you've never done it before, like 1,500 is like probably a great starting point, maybe even a little less down in the 1,200 to 1,000 to $800. Like, you know, you have to think about it. At one point you were making $0 doing this. And now you have a very, very big responsibility to capture someone's wedding day. And like, you know, you just can't come out of the gates blazing, charging, you know, $3,000 just because your bestie that's been doing it for 3 years is doing that. You know, it doesn't work like that. So just make sure you have the checkup from the neck up and make sure that you are not, you know, I forget the term I was going to use, or the little saying, but it, you know, you just got to make sure that you are not just, you know, overshooting, and you don't want to put yourself in a bad place where you're not able to get any business because you are just extremely overpriced.
Yeah. It's like kind of pricing based on ego versus pricing based on where you're at and what your clients are going to be comfortable with and where you're comfortable with allowing them to pay you that amount for the experience and everything that you have under your belt already.
Yes.
For me, it's nice to hear too, like, why am I embarrassed to say I made $800 my first wedding? Like, it's weird. Like, you shouldn't think that, you guys, if you're listening in. Like, I go back to it, and now Ben's telling me, like, that's $800 more than you had. And that almost probably paid for like my Canon 6D, like my first camera. And I probably only had like a nifty 50 and like maybe another lens. So thinking about it, like, you know, my overhead was so small. I got $800 and that is step one. And I was able to grow from there and shoot over 300 couples in my photography career. So it's just crazy to think like, I'm looking back now and like, it doesn't matter where you start. If you guys take anything away from this episode, I would say you got to start somewhere, right? Let's move up from zero is a good starting place. And, you know, take all these factors into consideration. And then as you're kind of growing your business and starting to think about, okay, where do I really want to be in the market as kind of a newer photographer or newer wedding industry professional? Then, so factors, you know, region, kind of like average price of weddings, and obviously the type of weddings you want to shoot as well. You know, you're saying like renting a venue space in a ballroom, like that's different than here where I'm at, where it's primarily outdoor weddings. And those are probably like 5 to 10K for like a Friday evening or a Saturday day. It's just totally different based upon where you're at. So it's probably good that we're talking from like kind of, you know, I personally live in a little bit more urban area, but it's pretty rural in Montana for the most part versus Chicago. Yeah.
And also too, for the listeners out there, like, you know, if you are charging $800 for your first wedding, break that down. If that's a 10-hour day, that's $80 an hour. Like, think about your homies that are, you know, at work, maybe like they have their first job and like out of college and they're making like, you know, $19 an hour, or like, you know, $23 an hour. That's good money. If it's an 8-hour day, that's $100 an hour. Like, where else do you know, normal 9 to 5 people that are, you know, right out of the gates making $100 an hour, $80 an hour? That's really good money. So it's all about perspective too. I think that people get caught up in like, oh, well, you know, so-and-so's charging this and so-and-so's charging that. But it's like, you know, think about the fact that, again, like, you know, to the normal world, like $80 an hour is really good money, you know? So don't discredit that regardless of where you're at.
Yeah. And even if you're extrapolating that down to like your hours you're working on pre-wedding stuff and culling and then editing and post-production and all of that, I mean, you're still probably making a decent amount of money depending on how fast you do it.
Right.
I love the idea that we're like 1,000 to 1,500 is probably a good starting place for people because they just like to be, people just need to be told, in my opinion, like where should you think about starting? So I love that, especially 2021, like there's more and more photographers and people in the wedding industry coming. I think, you know, our whole world erupted in 2020 and lots of people are rethinking their career paths. And I have seen more and more new photographers coming into the industry. And so that's a good starting place. Now let's go to the mindset of now what? You've been in the business for like 2+ years and you're ready to like be the photographer you want to be that you were thinking about 2 years ago, and you want to increase your pricing big time for the first time, I would say. What would you tell people on like being afraid to do that and like really owning where you're at? If you want to move from like, maybe at this point you're at a $2,500, $3,000 level, and we're being you guys so general here. But if that's where you're at and you want to move up to the $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 range, somewhere in there, what would you tell people? Like, what do you need to consider? How do you go about it? How quickly do you implement this? Those kind of things would be helpful for people right now.
For sure. Yeah. I'm personally like, you know, I look back on like the trajectory of, you know, how long it took me to get to this point. Okay. So as I was saying, in 2015, I was charging $1,500 as my starting price. Okay. And for 2022, so that's 7 years later, I'm starting at 7,000. Okay. And so it is gonna take time. I personally have really, unless I was like in the mindset of trying to, you know, most of my career, I have been all about volume. I want to just book. And so I've set myself at a price where like, you know, maybe I'm a little cheaper than I absolutely need to be, but you know, I'm able to book my 40 weddings a year. Okay, let's just say that. And so for me, I like to move and shift in like $500 to $1,000 increments, and probably closer to 500. And so, that sounds like it might take a while, but I usually, my rule of thumb is if I can book 30 weddings at the same price, then I will bump up by like 500 to 1,000, depending on how aggressive I want to be. And so again, it is a slow burn. If you only shoot 30 weddings a year, then maybe you're creeping up every year by $500, and that's okay. That's still a great jump. But, if you're somebody that's doing 50 weddings a year, halfway through your season, you can bump up to, allocate for the idea that, okay, you know what? I have 30 on the book. I only need, 20 weddings to live my life and pay for my bills and pay my expenses and all that stuff. So everything past 20 weddings is just the whipped cream and cherry on top. So let's get a little like saucy here and see if we can, bump up and see what people are willing to pay. And, if you bump up by $1,000 and you get crickets and you have no one inquiring, then you probably jumped a little too high. And so it's okay. The beauty about what we do is that we can change our prices at any given time for whatever reason we want to come up with. And so, maybe you drop it down, you jumped up by 1,000, let's bring it down to like 600 and see what happens. And, I usually wait about, I'm going to say 6 to 9 weeks before I start. Like if I change my prices, I give it 6 to 9 weeks to really like marinate and see if how people react to it. And if I'm at 9 weeks and no one has inquired and no one has booked, then it's like, okay, dude, like you're overpriced. So sorry, I kind of went off topic there, but what I'm trying to get at is I think that $500, maybe $700 increments are probably the way to go. It's a safe bet. And it's not dramatically more than it was the year before, but it's enough to account for the amount of time and effort that you've put in that past year or those past 30 weddings, in my opinion. So that's kind of what I've always coached people to do is, okay, so you have this many X amount of weddings for 2021. Now you're starting to book 2022. How should you price it? I usually start with a $500 increase and kind of go from there. And I even do that with my associates on my team. Last year they started at 3,000 and 4,000. Now they're at 3,500 and 4,500 because of the fact that each of them are going to be shooting an X amount of weddings for me this year, and they'll be that X amount of weddings better than they are for next year's clients. So they deserve to be compensated for that. And so do you. If you're listening, so do you. You deserve to be compensated for the time and effort that you've put in over the past, whether it's 12 months or 30 weddings, you deserve to be recognized and compensated for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Making it a methodical and strategic way of increasing pricing is very helpful for people. Because there's so many of you listening in that are like, just willy-nilly, I want to increase my pricing. I think I need to kind of thing.
Yes.
Versus, okay, every year, everyone has, throughout the US, if we're just taking the US, for example, I know we have people from other countries that tune in, but wherever you're at, okay, what is your wedding season looking like? When are you kind of done with your wedding season and when are people booking again? That booking season, the beginning of booking season is going to be kind of your year mark for changing pricing and looking at pricing. In my opinion, you can totally chime in here, Ben, if you think differently. For us, it was like finish out the fall season and then end of October, beginning of November, prior to the holidays is when a lot of us in my area are reevaluating what we're booking for next year. And then the year after as well, right? Because weddings you're usually booking somewhere between 6 to I'd say like 24 months out, typically speaking. There's of course longer ones and there's really, short ones as well. But I love the $500 to $700 increase because it's not too much. It's not putting your ego above the actual market. It's understanding that you're going to have more experience under your belt. With that increase, you can that's you were saying 30 weddings is what I try to do. And then I would look at changing my pricing as well. That's a good way and methodical way to do it as well. If you don't want to do it based on like your wedding season, you could do it based on how many weddings you shoot and then increase as well. So there's really two ways to do this here. And I love both options, Ben. And for people to be like, $500 to $1,000 increase, It might not seem like much, but that's like 15,000 to 20,000, 30. It's like 15,000 to $30,000 extra a year. And that's a lot to put behind your education, to put behind your equipment, to get better second shooters working for you. I mean, that's a lot that you can put back into your business, and then you increase again. And you guys, by the time you started 3 years ago to where you're at now, if you think about it, you're making like $45,000 more if you're just increasing by 500 each time and you're shooting 30 weddings. So the numbers really do say a lot.
Yes, that was a great breakdown. That was really cool and a cool visual to see. Like, damn, like $500 is an extra $15,000 a year if you're shooting 30 weddings. That's crazy. That's so much money.
And then it's like every year that's an additional amount. Maybe you start at 500 and then you go 750 the next year, and then you have another 1,000 like the year after that, and you're just getting better and better.
Right. That's like honestly like $15,000. It's like most people's like mortgage payment per year is they pay for $15,000 a year in their mortgage. So imagine, like just by increasing by $500 a month or $500 per wedding, you now have your mortgage covered, and you'll make the same amount that you did the year before plus, and now your mortgage is already taken care of. So like, there's always ways to like look at it. And like, I think about it. Okay, I have to buy a new camera. So I need to book one wedding to pay for that camera. Or, there's ways that you can, look at judging how you are priced and what your money's actually could be put towards. And I think that was a really cool breakdown of how you did that. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, of course. I'm a very realistic person. I'm not like a live in la la land kind of person. I'm also an econ major and math minor. And like, I run my business like a ship. Like, I have to know my numbers. I need to see my P&L statements. And I think taking that into account when I first started out, really thinking about pricing and thinking about it from a very business owner standpoint versus just throwing spaghetti at the wall and being like, oh, I hope someone purchases this package for this amount is a good way to go about it. And like Ben said, break it down. Like what did you not have last year that you now have this year? That's going to make you a little bit less stressed in your personal life. Your mortgage is covered. That's awesome. Just by increasing your pricing very, very small, like minimal increase there. Right. And then one other thing I think people are probably wondering as well is I had a hard time when I was starting out understanding what I'm outsourcing and how that comes into play with my pricing as well. Because when you're first starting, you are wearing all the hats. You don't have to think about that. You're just like, what do I want to get paid for all of my time committed to my business? Versus if you're starting to bring on independent contractors or you're outsourcing editing, maybe you have larger CRM systems that are helping you that you have to pay for. You're increasing, of course, maybe the quality of second shooters that you have. Maybe you just had some newer photographers in the industry helping you to begin with that are pretty inexpensive, maybe like $25, $30 an hour. And now you've got people that you're paying over $500, $700 for to second shoot with you. All of that is a cost of doing business. And so where would you tell people like, stop being afraid to increase your pricing if your costs are increasing?
Right. I think you always, no matter which business you're running, you need to know your bottom line. And what that means is like what it costs to run your business. So, do you have an employee that is, maybe your assistant or, running all of your client management? Do you have an editor? Do you have, how many second shooters do you have for there? You need to lay it out every single year and figure out what your bottom line is. Okay. On top of that, that's for doing business. You also need to figure out what it costs to live your personal life outside of your business. And so whatever your cost of doing business is plus your personal life expenses, that is the number you have to achieve. And therefore, you need to be priced appropriately, yes, with the fact that where you live and, how much experience you have, but you need to be priced appropriately that your basic needs and the basic needs that your business needs are covered. And so, let's say, for example, that it costs, let's say, I don't know, $30,000 a year to run your business, and it costs you $50,000 a year to live, then you need to make a minimum $80,000. And if you're only shooting 20 weddings, a year, that means you need to charge $4,000 a wedding. But are you worth $4,000 a wedding? Then that kind of comes into play. Okay, you know what? I'm only worth $3,000 a wedding. And so now like I need to do more volume, and maybe you have to sacrifice in certain ways to balance the books, right? So, I think just making sure you are on top of a budget, on top of your numbers, so that you know what absolutely has to come in for you guys to survive, not only in the business life, but also in your personal life too. That is super important while thinking about and strategizing your pricing.
Oh, that's so good. I think a lot of us don't think like that. You have to be better about bookkeeping in your personal life and your business life. You guys, I've talked about this so many times on this podcast. It's not even funny. Like I just like all I think about is money mindsets and strategically being a better business owner with your money. For one, if you're starting out that way and you're thinking about it the way Ben's telling you to, you are going to hella surpass your colleagues in the industry because you are already going to be thinking as a very successful entrepreneur versus one that's just kind of like dabbling in their hobbies and passions with photography or whatever, you're doing, say, in the wedding industry. The one thing I wanted to point out, Ben, that I was thinking as you were talking is editing and like outsourcing. And I want to talk about how that price reflects your client experience. So for me, when I first started out, I was doing everything, and it took me a while, in my opinion, to get photos back, especially for larger weddings. I had, I was crazy, and I would give people like 1,000 to 1,200 to 1,400 photos in their galleries. And that's just what I did. I don't care. You guys come at me. I loved doing it, and it wasn't a big deal to me. But I was editing all of that. And so it took me more time. So I would give like highlights or whatever, and that would be kind of my experience. And then it would be like 6 to 8 weeks until I gave a gallery back. When I outsourced my editing and was able to get weddings back basically within less than 2 weeks, was that client experience to people is worth a higher price. And so you have to also think about it in terms of what are you upping in your whole wedding photography experience with your clients? If you're upping that level of professionalism and quality, and that's going to help with referrals, and they're just going to be way more happy as customers, they pay for a happier experience. And so something to consider is when you're outsourcing, how is that going to overall level up your business? And that's where I don't want you to be fearful of increasing your pricing, not just because of what Ben and I were talking about, like you need to be in the black, like you need to at least balance your budget. And so if you're paying $300 to an editor to, cull through and edit your photos, okay, 300, but don't be afraid to be like, okay, I've leveled up my experience. I can charge now an extra 600 for that specific wedding package because my clients are going to get so much more than my clients did last year.
Right. Like there's only so much that you can do on your own. And so when you bring more people in that are, good at the craft that you've hired them to do, it will tighten up the experience. It will tighten up the assembly line, if you will. That is your business of the process from them inquiring to working with them to getting their photos back to, all those pieces are going to be on all cylinders all the time, which is going to in turn, provide a better client experience and get clients their photos back faster and probably more efficiently. Because when you hire people to do the things that you personally either don't like or you're not good at, and you give it to people that you are or that, do excel in those, in your weaknesses, then you have a team of people that are all working at all cylinders at their favorite things or favorite aspects of the job. And that in itself is worth more money. It is going to provide an experience that is unlike what your competition is doing. And you need to account for that when you're charging as well.
Yeah. And you're going to be able to shoot more weddings in general because you're not spending as much time on the weekdays, and you can actually have your like Tuesday, Wednesdays off. Like those are your weekend days.
Right.
I mean, I think about it all personally as well. Like what is the benefit here that I'm getting in my personal life from like outsourcing and then increasing my pricing a little bit based on that outsourcing? Oh my gosh, we could go on and on and on. I think this was super helpful for people, and I want everyone to kind of digest everything that we've talked about, because that's a lot. And it's a lot for people to be like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Now I need to implement and do. Ben, the one thing I want to end on is let's talk about when clients ask about your pricing. And we don't need to get into if you're putting it on your website or not putting it on your website, or if you're sending PDF guides to them. I mean, we're not going to go into that. I want to go into here, what if clients question your pricing? How would you suggest people go about this, especially when, say, you've just increased? Maybe they've heard word of mouth, they have friends who have paid a certain price, or I don't know, there's tons of scenarios I could come up with here in my mind. But if clients inquire and then they are questioning your pricing, instead of thinking in terms of a red flag client, how would you suggest people that are kind of 2, 3, 4 years in to, say, their photography career approach that situation in a genuine, kind manner that you do want to book that client?
Totally. That's a great question. I think that my biggest strength that I've had in those scenarios is just transparency. I've been very open and honest about my whole process and the value that I bring to my couples when they're working with me. And yes, when they see that, an 8-hour day costs $4,000, they're like, why do you deserve $500 an hour or whatever. Okay. But it's like, listen, it's not just that time that I'm with you. Yes, I'm professional and I'm doing my job the day of, but like all of the coordinating, all of the, a timeline meeting, the engagement session, the editing afterwards. And I think that really people, especially, thinking about in a traditional wedding sense, parents might be paying, your client actually might be the bride and groom's parents. And they might just be blowing their mind that, anything over $2,000 for pictures. And they're like, what is going on? Why? And so I think take the time to just address and just be like, hey, listen, I understand it's a lot of money, but you need to understand that the experience that I offer, and here is, X, Y, and Z how I go above and beyond, and how I will be not just a photographer, but also a resource, also a place where I'm the person that's going to be with you all day long on that day. And I'm also going to be one of the main people that's going to be working with you throughout this entire process. It's not just one day that you're paying me for. And I think just really opening up and just being transparent about the full process and just really explaining it to them. And at the end of that, if they're not down to clown, then there will be another photographer that might be $500 cheaper. And you know what? There's going to be somebody else probably a month or 2 or 3 or 6 months later that's going to see the it's and that's okay. It's hard to hear no up front, but just know that there's a yes down the line. Especially if it's a popular Saturday, do not be giving away your popular Saturday dates.
Definitely don't be doing that.
Yeah.
Increase your pricing on those days as well, if we're going to talk about pricing.
Exactly.
No, I love, you kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of don't be afraid of the no's, but be aware that your job as a service provider is to show them and educate them on the service you're providing for the price that they are going to be paying. And some clients just don't understand. Ben, you had a great point there of parents. They don't fully understand what's happening in the wedding industry nowadays, right? They know what happened 20, 30 years ago. And so they're like, oh, inflation, maybe I'll pay $1,000 more. They have no idea. And so just educating your prospective clients on that. And then the one thing I would put in here as well is I think if you're having people question your pricing at the get-go, you're not doing enough transparency wise on your explaining what's in that package to begin with when you're sending them the pricing. So people don't just like to see numbers. Yes. They want to know what's in that number. And if you're just kind of listing, I've seen this too much. And again, you and I could totally get into pricing way too in depth here. But I've seen people just like send a number and then like 5 bullet points of what's included in that. Your clients are going to question that. They're probably confused. They probably don't totally understand what that means. Like, how much are you educating them? Are you kind of,
what's a print fee?
Yeah, what's a print fee? Or like, I don't know, like, are you telling them they get this highlight and this amount in the gallery, and then they get a special surprise from me, and I guarantee I'm going to get it back within 4 weeks. And then they're seeing other photographers doing, 8 to 12 weeks. Like that, immediately they can understand that kind of concept of, okay, this person's probably worth more because they take this a little more seriously. I mean, all those things, you guys, you have to think about. If they're coming back to you, think about what your workflow process is for them to question your pricing to begin with.
Right. And I think too, like kind of going back to this, like it is, if your client is not in the wedding industry, they genuinely have no idea. And it's not that they are, saying that you're not worth it, but they're just having sticker shock in the sense that like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that wedding photography costs this much. And again, like educate. Just let them know, bring them in, make them feel welcome, make them feel comfortable, and just lay out exactly how you will serve them and how they will be taken care of. And I think when you go above and beyond to explain all that to them, they are going to be wanting to give you their money, no doubt.
Yeah. And I love the transparency too of like, if you've just increased your pricing and now you're in this ballpark of like, you're nervous for people to purchase that package for that price from you based upon what you had people paying a year or two ago, that's a really good thing to talk about with your clients. Like, don't be afraid to tell them, well, a couple years ago, this is where I was at as a photographer. Now I have 60 plus weddings under my belt. Like, this is how I've leveled up my client experience, and this is what you're going to get from me. And not only that, I mean, let's wrap in here. This is a good way to tie up this episode. What Ben said of, and by the time I shoot your wedding, I will have 40 more weddings under my belt. So I'm going to be like, the level of experience I can give you is going to be exponentially better than what I gave my clients a year ago. Say if they're talking about their friend who purchased it from you last year. Okay, any last tidbits for people as we wrap this up here, Ben? This was so helpful to everybody.
Good. I'm so glad. And sorry if I went on a bunch of tangents and stuff, but I feel like I just get so excited and just start jumping around a little bit. But I think the biggest thing is, you need to have strategy behind your pricing. You cannot just throw numbers out there because the people around you are doing so, or, you think you're worth that. Okay. You need to take a step back and think about and see how much people are already paying you and build your prices based off what you are already worth. What the people have told you and your clients have told you that you are worth. Do not just shoot in the dark, and, just be patient. Be patient. It is not an overnight thing. I have been increasing my pricing periodically over the course of 7 years. And now I'm finally at the place where I'm at a place now that I never even thought I would ever be at. But, the market has told me, and I've leveled up my experience every time I've leveled up my pricing. And I've just, I've shown time and time again that consistency is key. And, you just need to just be patient. Just roll with it. It's all going to be good. Just don't think it's going to happen overnight, because it's not. Yeah,
that's the best real advice anyone could get from if you are a newer business owner. It does not happen overnight. And the people we aspire to be and our role models in the industry have worked their ass off to get where they're at. And so you have to do that too. I could have a whole episode on hustling and why I think it's so important, because I just don't understand there's a 1 in a million, like you get that golden ticket break, but that doesn't happen to everyone. And so you have to work hard, and especially photography in particular, you're going to change it's an evolution of your style and an evolution of your art. And with that comes changes in pricing as well. And so allow that to kind of fester and work out itself on its own with the business that you create. And patience, I think patience is the biggest thing. Allow it to happen over time and not overnight. Ben, where can people find you? I think a lot of people are going to be reaching out to you being like, I like the way that Ben is mentoring and helping us. I know that you offer those services to people in the wedding industry. So I would love to hear a little bit about that. And then if they have further questions or, want to continue the conversation on one of these points, where can they holler at you?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to give you two different accounts. My first account is my photography account. If you want to come be a fellow photographer, come hang out, see what we're doing. You can follow me at I am Ben Ramos on Instagram. And the website there is benramosphotos.com. And then the coaching and mentoring. So that company is called Bread and Honey. So on Instagram, it is at Bread and Honey Co, all spelled out. And then the website is breadandhoneyco.com.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to link all of this, you guys. Ben, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was awesome to talk about pricing and not talking about anything legal. So you guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And Ben, thanks again so much. We appreciate your time.
Yay, Paige. Thanks for having me. Have a good one, guys.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.